Hello! Welcome to our weekly conversation. I'm Pastor Jane Gingrich, and I serve Hills of Peace Lutheran Church here in Kamloops, British Columbia.
And I'm Pastor John Boyd, and I serve St. George's Anglican Parish here in Kamloops, British Columbia.
Every week, as a clergy couple, we have a conversation over coffee or other hot beverage, and share that online with a Q&A follow-up the next day. This week, our topic is Ecumenism, and as I serve a Lutheran congregation here in town and work ecumenically, and you serve in an Anglican congregation as Lutheran clergy, and together we work ecumenically, it's a very fitting topic for us. Particularly in these days, I think, as we are apart and mostly online, I believe that people have a greater opportunity to be looking at how other denominations, other communities of faith, even other faith traditions are able to worship. And with the opportunities on Facebook and through Zoom and YouTube and a variety of other social media, there are lots of opportunities to explore more broadly what it means to be a person of faith. But to get us going, thinking about ecumenism, what does it mean to serve ecumenically as you do?
Well, we have a unique full communion agreement, which means that we have a common shared understanding enough of who Jesus Christ is and what it means to be the church and how the church is, i.e. what it does and what it believes, that our two faith traditions are mutually interchangeable. In other words, Lutherans can go worship at Anglican worship services, receive communion, receive spiritual care from Anglican priests, even become members of an Anglican parish, and there's no big extra change or steps that they have to take. In other words, Lutherans are not required to convert to Anglicanism in order to still be faithful or recognized as members of the actual church and Christian. And the same is true vice versa. So under that Waterloo Declaration agreement that our two traditions signed, as long as I have the permission and approval of an Anglican bishop and the assent of a congregation that's Anglican, I can be appointed to serve as a parish priest, just as a deacon or another member of the clergy could, either way, Lutheran or Anglican.
And so as long as, say, being a Lutheran, you follow Anglican protocols, you can take on a position of leadership in an Anglican congregation, and vice versa. An Anglican following Lutheran protocols could participate and become part of the leadership of a Lutheran congregation or community. And so we see an example of that with your ministry alongside St. George's. We have other examples of ecumenical shared ministries even within our own region. Granted, our region, as the Southern Interior region of the British Columbia Synod for Lutherans, is slightly different in its configuration to the territory, but I believe for both of us that Barrier and Clearwater are included in the areas. And so Barrier and Clearwater have a shared ministry, which looks like Lutherans, Uniteds, and Anglicans all working together and worshiping together on Sundays, joining together in all of their programming and activities, and having a common facility, and calling a singular priest, minister, or pastor each time. And so at this time, they had just had a Lutheran minister for 6 years and have now called an Anglican priest. That shows how closely our denominations can work together. I would say there's a lot of benefit to this opportunity to work alongside, to worship together, to recognize the compatibility and connection as well as similarities of our faith. I'm wondering, being in a context where you are serving Anglicans with a Lutheran lens that I recognize is becoming more and more Anglican in lots of ways, what are some of the particular gifts that you have recognized in being together as two denominations under one roof?
I think one of the gifts to me, and it's hard not to be selfish about this, is that the liturgy of the Anglican Church at present that's in the BAS is very similar to the Lutheran liturgy that I grew up with as a child and I'm most familiar with. So there's been, not just in a nostalgic way, but there's been a very good opportunity to revisit that now in my life journey and my journey of faith, and revisit all the things that I was saying when I was a child that I may not have fully understood, and to learn about that and to share that with the parish, especially in our adult classes for study and for growth and understanding and faith. We're starting to look at bits and pieces of all this, bit by bit, and share stories about what that means from their life experience as Anglicans and from my understanding and life experience as Lutherans. And I think that together we're actually growing more in our understanding of what it is to be a Christian.
It's interesting because when there are differences or things that are not necessarily identical, you notice them more and learn from each other, as you're saying. I know, having studied at a seminary as you did, that was part of a ecumenical theological union of Lutheran United and Anglican seminaries together. There were lots of opportunities for us to worship together with seminary students and professors from all three denominations, and how you could kind of see the marks of each one when we gathered for worship, but that there were generally the broad strokes pretty similar through each sets of worship. There are times where it can also be a challenge, I think, for ecumenism to flourish. And one of the things I'm thinking of in this time of global pandemic is how we, as 6 communities in Kamloops, the Lutheran United and Anglican congregations of Hills of Peace, Mount Paul United, St. George's Anglican, Kamloops United, St. Paul's Anglican, and Plura Hills United, used to do many things together throughout the year that all required physical presence. We met together in person, we gathered together in person, there was food that was central to each of these, and it has been that much harder since we have been online to figure out how to get those gatherings of 6 diverse congregations drawn together. There is some talk of doing some work together in the fall, but at this time, I wonder if being apart and even having some worry about what this pandemic means for how we are individually, it's not easier than to focus on our individual congregations as opposed to recognizing our commonality and the ecumenical ties that we have together and the gifts that we bring in terms of richness and dialogue and learning to each other when we are apart because of this online global pandemic situation. And so as I'm recognizing those challenges in terms of how we as a congregation at Hills of Peace attempt to engage and seek connection and realize there's limits to what that can be right now and find challenges, I'm very grateful that we have this, that St. George's and Hills of Peace have been able to work together and have these conversations. I'm wondering if you've noticed or seen any other challenges in general to what it might mean to try to connect that through this time of pandemic have either been they've been brought up or amplified?
That's a question that I think really sits with me when I come to the table of any kind of ecumenical conversation, that yes, this pandemic has definitely amplified. We want to do a lot of things together, we want to share things, and we want to cooperatively enter into ministry together to address large-scale constant human needs. I think what shows at the local level is the also globalized issue that has been happening, I would say, ever since the 50s and the 60s with the modern ecumenical movement. And that is, there became a trend in ecumenism that the way to do it was to ignore all of these differences and these finer details that you're talking about and simply focus completely on all of the shared commonalities, to the point where we were looking at each other's differences and just saying, well, that's Lutheran under a different label, or that's Anglicanism under a different label. And I think that there's a way in which there's a danger of covering up the truth of how these differences are significant and have deep implications for shared ministry and for working together. And I think sometimes what's valuable is maybe slowing down just a little bit and really trying to listen to each other and have good conversations about the differences and owning them and being honest about them, and saying, tell me more about what's different about you and why that's so important.
Is there anything in particular that you're thinking of or that has come up?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things in the COVID pandemic that's become apparent to me is that I really do need to rely on the Book of Alternative Service liturgies, for example, in the Anglican worship, because of the difficulty of getting everyone different resources, publishing them, making them available online. And I'm thinking specifically that there are certain elements of Lutheran worship, because of our full communion agreement, that are authorized for use in the territory, but I don't, as much as I may want to, feel that right now is a good time to introduce them, because I would have to photocopy everything, get it to people. I'm not there in person to help the congregation walk through. Our choir is not singing in together, so we can't have a chance to actually practice together. Mm-hmm. So even though there is a wonderful ecumenical opportunity, that's also a challenge to begin to focus on that diversity, when right now we just need to make sure that our people have a healthy, consistent life of prayer. So it's unfortunate, but that's part of where we're at. What about in your ministry?
Well, one of the struggles I know, not just locally, but for Lutherans in Canada working ecumenically, as we certainly have ecumenical relationships in other countries as well, but Lutherans in Canada is our size. For the Lutheran Church, I mean, we have, I believe it's 49 congregations in all of British Columbia, and 8 communities here in the Southern Interior region. And so while our Lutheran clergy get to know each other and have lots of collegiality, we're also dwarfed by the number and the size of ecumenical partners. And so it's interesting, I find, to be working with other denominations and learning about polity and process and resources and formation and so many aspects of being in ministry that are parallel, and yet because of the different sizes of our denominations, things are so different. Within our province, it would be strange for me not to know who someone was or where they were serving. We all tend to know each other. Right. I wouldn't assume the same of United and Anglican colleagues, because there are so many more churches for each of those denominations. Mm-hmm. So there are gifts in having a smaller group. There's some change that we've seen happen more quickly, because information sharing, communication, and decision formation happens a little bit differently among Lutherans. But then also the resources, the capacity, and the widespread reaching opportunities are different in the Lutheran tradition. And so ecumenism offers insight into wide diversities of how ministry is engaged and mission is shared throughout the country and the world. But it would be silly to say that in gathering together we always understand each other, right, because there are, even in our language, right? There's, well, in Lutheranism we call it a region. Well, in local Anglican circles it's called a territory. And a synod for us is a division of a roughly provincial or a little bit bigger than provincial area. But a synod in the Anglican tradition is a gathering that we would call a convention.
Right.
So, I mean, there's always the joke of needing even a dictionary to understand each other. And yet while I do sometimes struggle with making sense of neighbors in faith, I think this is so much of what we're called into. What better place to grow and learn more about what I believe than with a group of Christians who have similar but slightly different understandings? Because therein, the conversation works itself out. Therein, the dialogue isn't always going to be easy, but through the perhaps little bits of dissonance, there can be growth. The cracks appear and things grow through. And so I'm really grateful that at this time in the life of the world, we are able to work so closely alongside a variety of denominations, and also to learn from each other, learn about a variety of ways of worship, learn about traditions and history, learn from each other's mistakes, and recognize that together it's really all of us who are the body of Christ, not any one singular denomination. And so, despite the pandemic and despite these last few months of feeling like we need to do that internal piece to kind of keep going and figure out where we're at, what we're up to next, I'm excited for the fact that we are seeking ways to work more closely ecumenically in the months ahead around in Kamloops. Thank you for listening. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow on Thursday at 10 a.m. for the Clergy Couple Q&A. Let's keep the conversation going. What have your experiences of ecumenism been, and what else would you like to share in terms of your stories of ecumenical experience? Thanks again, and we'll see you tomorrow.